Welcome to the Top Order podcast. Lippy, Binksy and Raj in the room this week. The cricket keeps coming thick and fast. On tonight's show, we're going to talk New Zealand, Bangladesh. Is New Zealand's World Test Championship all over? It doesn't look like it is, with the second test underway already. We're going to talk a bit of India, Australia. Glenn Maxwell turns up again. What's going on? Rahul Dravid's renewal as India coach. We've also got a little bit of news coming up ahead of the Australia-Pakistan series. Are you okay, Mitchell Johnson? All coming up on the Top Order podcast. Stay tuned. Well, boys, we've got heaps and heaps of cricket, as always, on the Top Order this evening. So we're recording this, I think, Wednesday evening in New Zealand. So the second test in Mirpur has just kicked off for the Black Caps. Bangladesh winning the toss, electing to bat. We won't go into the game too much, but already some talking points for next week's show. Not often you see a handled ball.
No, I want to see that. It just happened
in test cricket. But look, I think what we want to do is talk about the test match last week, don't we? The first test. I know, Stu, you've got some passionate views, Raj, I'm sure as well, from a selections perspective. The spinners that were on show throughout the course of the game. And you look at, I guess the question is tongue-in-cheek in the Slack channel, but, you know, is the World Test Championship already over after one game? I don't think it is. But feelings after that first game?
I was pretty sad watching that fourth innings. I just sort of felt like deflated. I know, and probably even the third innings, because New Zealand, I mean, I'm sure we'll get to it shortly about the spin component of it and the way that game kind of panned out. But you sort of knew when that third innings was going that it was going to be hard to chase. And look, you know, New Zealand's won the toss or lost the toss here in the second test. They're going to be chasing again unless they can put up a huge first innings score and kind of, you know, win by an innings. They're going to have to try and win this test in the fourth innings again, and it just makes it tough. And our spinners and the way the game panned out and our batters, it just didn't go well. And look, it's been, you know, a historic week for New Zealand cricket in many ways, and all of them bad. And that the White Ferns have lost for the first time to Pakistan in a T20, and they doubled up again and made it two. And New Zealand lost their first test away from home against Bangladesh after losing, you know, the home tests in a couple of summers ago, 18 months ago. So yeah, it hasn't been a great week for New Zealand cricket.
No, that's very poignant start there. I guess if I isolate it, I agree with you around that third innings. I think that's where I felt the most deflated. I can't quite put my finger on it. I know that, you know, there's been talk about we weren't able to build pressure. Our spinners just weren't as dangerous looking in the second innings of each. You know, if you compare the Bangladeshi spinners to our spinners, and also you've just got to take your hat off to Shanto. I think he batted really, really well in that Bangladeshi second innings. But yeah, spin is a big concern for me. Do you want to go down that tack now?
Can I just ask you a question, both, before we do go down into the weeds a little bit? Is your expectation as Black Caps fans you're going to go to Bangladesh and win a test series away from home?
Well, I think that's sort of where I wanted to go as well, because my expectation was, yes, I think that we should be going into this test thinking that we should win. And then obviously this game happened, and I started to think to myself, okay, let's actually look at some statistics. The last World Test Championship wasn't very good for us over in New Zealand, or, you know, throughout that cycle. I think if you're being kind, you can look at all of the results throughout that cycle and kind of make excuses for some of them. You know, often a lot of the test series were drawn. You know, in Pakistan, I think about away from home, we drew that series. I think we were the better side, but, you know, probably should have won those. England, you know, drawing that series against in New Zealand felt like, you know, it was a good result after what England had done to us in that first test. And, you know, you can go on and on. You can look back to the England series even away from home where we lost 3-0, but we were in all of those games, on and on and on. But actually, I mean, when you run through the numbers, I put it down, you know, since New Zealand won the World Test Championship in June 2021, they played 16 tests. They're into their 8th series, and their record during that time is 5 wins, 3 draws, 8 losses. They've only won one series, which is at home to Sri Lanka last summer. It doesn't make for good reading. And for comparison, I started to think, okay, who are the other teams that are, you know, lower down on the pecking order that we think are in a bit of strife? The West Indies have played 17 tests since that time. They've won 5, drawn 4, lost 8, albeit, some of their wins, Pakistan, 3 against Bangladesh at home, 1 against Zimbabwe. Sri Lanka have played 16. They've won 7 of those tests, drawn 1, lost 8. They've beaten the West Indies, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Ireland, but they've also beaten Australia. So, two sides that I would say are very, pretty low down in the where their test cricket is at the moment. New Zealand's numbers don't stack up especially well. I mean, that was going to be my question to you, Raj. I mean, where do you think we're at as a test nation at the moment?
Yeah, I think in my notes last week, and then we were doing a little preview to it, I had down that they had something to prove. This was a New Zealand team that had a little bit to prove in this World Test Championship cycle. We've gone through our sort of golden age over the last sort of 5, 8, 7, however many years you want to count it. And a lot of tone was going to be set based on that first test. I expected New Zealand to still win that test. I expect them to go to Bangladesh and win. I expect them to be very, very strong at home. Going to India to win, going to Australia to win is another story completely. That's something that we need to unpack if and when that happens. But to answer your question simply, yes, I expected New Zealand to go there and win that series in Bangladesh.
Yeah, and now it's crucially important for you said it's a bit tongue in cheek to say that the World Test Championship is it over, but I think they have to win the second test now. If they don't win the second test, then you look at the rest of their fixtures. We ran through it all last week. Yeah, they have to get points from this series. They've got South Africa at home. We expect that to be a weakened side, but then it's Australia, then it's India away, then it's like there's all these tough series coming up for the World Test Championship, and we really have to get some points out of this. Otherwise, it is going to be big trouble for New Zealand. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about selections and then the spin question that you just asked then, Ross. So one change going into this second test. So Ishmael is out and in comes Mitchell Santner. So turning the ball in the same direction potentially offers a lot more with the bat, really, I guess. But what are your thoughts and why is that a question mark for you in terms of that first test match? You've got that, you've got that up there as a, worst selections a part to play in that.
To be honest, I don't actually think the selection plays a huge part in the result. Yeah. I think that there are big selection discussions to be had, and I mean Henry Nicholls is the one that everyone is kind of pointing to, and look, it's the fact that we've been talking about it for 2 years is kind of the biggest talking point. And when Luke Ronke afterwards has been asked about Henry Nicholls, and he mentions he's been the form player in the Plunket Shield, he's scored double 100 in his last test. You can see the logic there. If you're going through all of that, you can see the logic. But then you can look at the other side. There's been 2 articles that have come out on Stuff, the New Zealand media here, over the last couple of days. And one of them was a big piece by Mark Reason, who's an opinion writer and kind of just fires everyone up. He was saying that the selection was appalling and all this stuff. There was another one actually written by Andrew Voorman, which was much more calculated and much more convincing and explained it really, really well, I thought. And it just ran through all of Nicholls' numbers, and his away numbers are terrible. They have been terrible for 2 years. And I guess the confusing part about all of this for me is that we can go around and say, okay, well, we're going to Bangladesh. That means we don't pick this bowler. But you don't do the same with a batter, and I don't. Look, I hope Nicholls, for the sake of New Zealand, I hope Nicholls scores runs in the second test. But I think if you look at all those runs figures, it's really bizarre that they can't just go. That's, I guess, the part that I'm most sort of upset about. I don't understand why they can't go. Okay, well, horses for courses with our bowlers. Why don't we actually do horses for courses with our batters and say, he doesn't perform especially well away from home. He's not dropped. He's just not in this side. He's not in our best 11. Maybe when we're back in our home summer, perform in the Plunket Shield and you have another opportunity.
Yeah, look, selection for me, I don't think it had a massive bearing on that result. However, I do think there were elements that were missing. I have an issue with selecting 3 spinners when you can only bowl 1 spinner from each end. So that's 2 if you count them up. That's something that we're probably never going to agree on. You and me are lippy there, but I just think we should be playing to our strengths. I think we needed an extra pace bowler at that time. Our strength has been pace bowling. You look at when we play in New Zealand, England we're never going to play, well, we hardly ever play a spinner. We always play pace bowlers. That's where our strength lies. I don't think that changes going over to another part of the world. You can see the way that they bowled, the numbers that they returned. Jameson looked dangerous with the ball
he bowled
early.
really well, actually.
He bowled really well, especially in the first innings. I don't see any reason why pace bowling cannot be as effective on those pitches for us in terms of us taking wickets.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you on this one. I think you don't pick a spinner at home. So if a guy's not good enough to play in all conditions, then what you're saying is your seam attack is good enough to play in all conditions. And a little bit like we've seen, and look, I don't want to sort of harp on about England necessarily, but they went to Pakistan. Yes, they did have some options with the spin bowling, but they were comfortable to let that be a Will Jacks or someone that was a little bit of a part-time option. And then they were like, do you know what? Jimmy Anderson is going to get something out of this wicket more than our third spinner is going to, so we'll pick him. Or Mark Wood is going to give us that point of difference because he takes the pitch out of the equation because he's going to bowl 90 mile an hour and bowl pretty full. So I think if the guys that you've got, and particularly we've seen in world cricket over the course of the last couple of years, really, the short ball become really effective as a way of taking wickets. You've got Neil Wagner there. You've got options there that I think are going to be more impactful to try and take the 20 wickets that you need to win a test match. Obviously, we know nothing because we look at the selection, and the only change is bringing in a different spinner. I think we said, I think on the Slack channel, Ish struggled a little bit in that first test match, and if you can't build control, you can't build pressure. And I thought that's what Bangladesh did really, really well in terms of the way their spinners bowl. They tried to really rip the shin off the batters for long periods of time, and it bloody worked.
Their spinners, it's been, I'm not the first person to say this, but their spinners completely out-bowled our spinners, and that was the difference in the game. I mean, Taijul bowled, he was tremendous, and, he's not someone I've seen a huge amount of. I've seen little bits and pieces when Bangladesh has played at home, but, the thing that really stood out is that exactly what you just said. He just didn't bowl any bad balls, and the New Zealand spinners, Ish especially in that first innings, I do feel a bit sorry for him because he's in Pakistan. He was our best bowler, right? He's the best bowler in that series. He then goes to this World Cup. He gets one game. I thought he was going to be a big part in that World Cup. He plays one game, gets like a rain-reduced opportunity, doesn't take his chance, misses out for the rest of the World Cup. Comes into this game, which is a completely different scenario from all the white ball stuff that he's been coming in. And then bowled really poorly, I think, by his standards in the first innings. Actually improved a little bit in that second innings, started to kind of hit his straps, and then, doesn't play this game. He's now not going to, there's no chance that he'll play at home, I wouldn't have thought. And so, that might be it. Like, it's as crazy as that for New Zealand. Like, that might be his last test, which, sounds a bit hyperbolic, but, it'll be a year before New Zealand probably thinks about playing a spinner again in a test match. So, yeah, it's tough on him.
And you've got bowlers like Ashok coming through as well, Adi Ashok, who are good young spinners who are ready to take that next step as well. So you've got to start looking at them as well. The other selection one player that I thought should have played was Rachin Ravindra. If I'm looking at, you mentioned Henry Nicholls.
That surprises me, Raj.
You're looking at, Henry Nicholls, you're looking at Glenn Phillips, you're looking at Rachin Ravindra. If I look at those three batsmen, you've got to pick two of them. The first one I'm picking is Rachin Ravindra, based on his international form coming into this. He struggled to get out. He was that good at the ODI World Cup. I was surprised that he didn't get a run early on. He hasn't got a run in this second test either.
What do you make then of like the way that Ronke's kind of explained that situation? So he sort of said, okay, it's a different format. We've got, guys that have been proven in this format that, ODI cricket is, it's a different game. It's different. Like, I guess in my defense of the batters in this first test, they have gone from flat wickets in India, 300 plus ODI wickets, to this Bangladesh wicket, which, in that first test and it seems in the second test as well, hugely different conditions. It's spinning a lot. It's, low bounce. What do you make of the fact that, is it as simple as just translating that form into a different format, or is there some merit in, what Ronke's saying?
Well, I guess we shouldn't use Kane as an example, but he didn't seem to struggle to translate that form from the white ball to the red ball. Look, the only indicator that we're not in the camp. You got to pick the players who've scored the runs, and he's scored the runs, and he's got the runs under his belt. To Henry Nicholls' a point in his favour, he has scored runs at home in red ball cricket, but like you said, it's a completely different scenario scoring runs on the subcontinent.
Yeah, and look, that was going to be my point. When it's convenient, you talk about domestic form with the colour of cricket ball that's relevant, and when you don't want it to be relevant, you talk about performing on the international stage. So, I think there's a little bit of rhetoric there. I always find it really, really interesting when Ronke gets wheeled out to do that press. That's an indication of really what's going on in the camp, right? Where you're sending out your coach.
Well, he's the coach.
Yeah, I know he's the coach,
he's
but
not
rather than a skipper. To make that, and you see it when you've had a bad day. It's always the coach who fronts up and does the media, and you're not getting that message from the guy that's the guy that's in charge potentially.
Yeah, well, on that, because I think a lot of obviously Ravindra's form has led to this big conversation about why isn't Ravindra in the side and all that stuff. That's been that's a big factor, but I think also a huge part of it is the fact that he's young, and everyone in New Zealand is clamouring. You just mentioned Addy Ashok. He's a name that comes up a lot. Personally, I don't quite think Addy is ready for international cricket. I hope he gets there. I think he's a hugely talented player, but there's a lot of clamouring for young players in New Zealand to start getting through. And a lot of criticism that I see is all around the coaching staff. Is it the coaching staff of the New Zealand side's responsibility to blood young players? I genuinely don't really know the answer to that question. I'm interested to hear your thoughts because, is it the coaching staff? Is it the selectors? Is it New Zealand cricket's responsibility? Is it, the province's responsibility? Because it's the same sort of question for spinners, I think. It's all of that, we haven't developed a spinner and now we go overseas and we look to try and win these tests overseas, and we're asking a lot of Ish and Ajaz and guys that don't play test matches. They play 2 test matches a year, 4 test matches a year, and you're saying, okay, now come and win us a test. Like, where does the line fall? Is it kind of all those things, or what do you guys think?
Well, my point is that shouldn't be happening. We should be using the pace bowlers first up. That's the point I was kind of trying to make earlier. They're the ones who we trumpet out for the majority of our test matches. But I think that from a coaching perspective, to answer that first part of your question, it's a two-way street. When we won the World Test Championship, Gary Stead and his coaching staff were the greatest coaches in the game. They got all the plaudits for doing that. But when it goes wrong, it's kind of got to fall back on them as well. And when there are genuine selection questions, when deviated from the norm, there have been. I remember back to. A tour back to Sri Lanka. I think it was one of Gary Stead's first tours where Tim Southey wasn't selected in the first test. He came into the second test and took a fifer. There are selection questions that come up when we go to conditions that probably are a little bit foreign. And it's a two-way street. If things are successful, he gets all the plaudits, him and his staff. I probably agree with the large elements of what you said, apart from that the coaching staff get the plaudits when it goes right. It's the players that probably normally get the plaudits when something goes right, and the coaching staff then sit in the background and kind of let the players revel in that moment. I think from a plans perspective, I think it's about having clarity of what you want to do as a side, and you had great clarity through that World Test Championship series. You have been pretty unequivocal in the view that Ajaz isn't going to play at home, and then you're going to wheel him out, and you're going to wheel out 2 or 3 other guys that haven't really played any cricket. I think he would learn an awful amount more from them trying to get him into
cricket on a flat, a wicket that's not conducive to spin. We look at the way that the Bangladeshi bowlers bowled on a helpful pitch, let's be honest. But all they really did was put the ball in the right areas, and I think Ajaz would learn that from bowling at the Basin or from bowling at wherever you want to play, Hagley or wherever, on day one. And yes, his job on day one isn't to take 5 for 25, it's to maybe get 1 for 50 off 20 overs and bowl at 3 and over and allow the seamers to rotate. So I think part of it has got to be that planning that the coaches have put in place. So I think they have to take a little bit of the responsibility for the way that they're going to play across 17 or 18 test matches since 2021 and what the long-term plan of that side is.
Can I also say, just isolating that first test, the way that the Bangladeshi batsmen attacked or were more aggressive against our bowlers was very evident to the way that, or compared to the way that New Zealand batted against the Bangladeshi bowlers. From a pathways perspective, you're talking about developing spinners. I think that there is a responsibility to develop spinners, and I don't have the answer for you around how they do that, because Ajaz is the poster boy. He has bowled so many overs at domestic level. Yeah. He bowls one end pretty much the whole day in red ball for CD when he is playing for them with the red ball. So I don't know what the answer is around developing, but there is question marks.
He's doing the same with Eddie, to be fair. They bowl him a lot of overs. He bowls big spells, and I think that's going to be great for his development. That's kind of why I say I think a couple more years for him doing that will certainly help. But I mean, I guess on that youth, how do they do you think really they need to be looking long term and thinking how do we start sneaking these younger players in without mucking up the balance of your side?
That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is you have a plan as to how you're going to win through a cycle, and if you pick that your plan is that you're not going to develop and use spin during that cycle, go with it and go with that as your game plan. I don't think anyone's got the answer to this. There's been initiatives in the Sheffield Shield to try and get more spin into the game. They've done the same in the English County Championship. They did away with the toss for a period of time. They talked about the way that the wickets would be prepared. They talked about even the cricket ball to try and get more spin. They messed around with the bonus points to try and encourage you to bowl more spin. Everyone's trying to develop genuine quick bowling and genuine spin and try to move that reliance away from when there's a little bit in the wicket. You've got guys that do just enough with it at 130 135 Ks. So everybody's trying exactly the same the same thing that you're trying. I think the reality is you don't play a spinner in all seasons, and when you go overseas it puts a hell of a lot of pressure on the guy that is meant to then almost elevate himself for 4 or 5 test matches a year when you're on the road in conditions that aren't conducive to the rest of your team as well.
Yeah. Look, moving a bit on from that, because I know we want to move on to a couple of other topics. Just the last thing I want to mention from New Zealand is Kane Williamson, really, and his performance in that test and that 100 that he scored. And I think that was, I guess the biggest thing I want to say is that, look, again, this is probably not going to be revolutionary for anyone, but if anyone out there does not realise that Kane Williamson is a living legend of New Zealand cricket, it's time to realise that, because I mean, that was his 3rd consecutive 100 in terms of innings. That was his 4th test, I think, where he'd scored 100. They were all, crucially important, runs in those tests. The 2 against Sri Lanka, scored that 1 against England, which kind of brought them back and won them that game. He scored this 100 in the first innings, which he was the only, I think him and Daryl Mitchell were the only batters that looked like they actually had a plan against the spin. You mentioned that before about how Bangladesh just kind of put it on the spot, and Mitchell was there reversing. It makes me a bit nervous watching him reverse sweep every single ball, even when it's pitched on leg stump. But the fact that he was doing that, it was clearly his plan. And Kane was the same. He came out, he knows his game so well, and I mean, he is just an unbelievable player. And the fact that he has done this after 6 months out of the game and has come back, and you run through all his numbers. I mean, I've got some numbers down here in terms of, like, that's his 29th Test 100. He joins, Don Bradman and Virat Kohli on that number, so, pretty impressive. His ratio of Test 100s is now third of all players that have over 20 hundreds, and that's a pretty amazing list of Don Bradman and Steve Smith. If you go back and look at, I don't have the number down, but like the last 5 or 6 years of Kane's career, his average is well over 60. Like, he is such a phenomenal player, and he's always been in this big four conversation, but I wish he played more tests so could kind of vault higher up that chart.
And that's kind of my discussion point on this. It's not how good he is. We know he can play. How do we keep him on the park? How do we keep him on the park in a black hat or black shirt?
The white shirt. The white shirt's the one I want to see him play for a long time.
When there's so much opportunity around the world, how do we keep him playing good cricket till he's 40?
Yeah, look, I think probably the relinquishing of the captaincy is going to have helped, because I think that is always a big thing. You look at how that's impacted guys that have done it for any country in the world. You've done it for a period of time, and he did it for a really good period of time. So I wonder whether that might be a conversation around the white ball stuff as well. It seems a natural time to maybe look at making that change. And then I think your answer is, to an extent, he's probably, as much as anyone, earned the right to go off and earn some franchise cash. So I think it is ultimately which format does he relinquish to see him continue in the white shirt, and then I forget what colours you wear in the different one-day stuff. Do you mix it up?
We've got a teal.
You got a teal and a
beige,
black.
black.
Yeah. So look, ultimately, I think it's does he give away ODIs or T20s and play two of the three formats?
You bring him into for
the World Cup
for the tournaments.
For the tournaments, maybe, and let him play the franchise stuff.
He doesn't seem far away from. He doesn't seem like he's thinking about stopping anytime soon, which I certainly hope is the case. The last thing I will say about him is, did you guys see on his bat there's a huge big cherry right in the middle? Now you're smiling because I want to know. So what is it? Because look, any cherry for me was an honour. I didn't care if it was on the edge anywhere, when I was playing. But what's happened there? Is it the fact that he's been in the nets and just hitting every single ball in the middle, or is he just shaved off the ones that are not in the middle? What's the deal?
I don't want to cast any aspersions. He's a living legend, you just said. But if I was to guess, I'd say he's probably removing some of the inside edge cherries, not around the middle of the bat. But, I'm not going to say that if he tells me, no, he just hits everything out of the middle, I'm not going to argue with him.
Sure, I didn't even know that was a thing. So you sand off the edges?
Just
wipe off the edges?
If you've got like a facing on it, you can just wet wipe it off.
Right.
Yeah.
There was a very significant red, big red mark right in the middle of his bat, which is where he was hitting most of the balls in that first inning, so I won't begrudge him. But yeah, I did notice that and think, what's going on there?
Cool. Let's come on to another guy who's been hitting the middle of the bat pretty regularly over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks. Glenn Maxwell will talk about, I think another one for his highlights reel. But that T20 series is now finished, 5 games, a win for India pretty comfortably in the end, wasn't it? 4-1, I think.
And look, Australia's team in that last couple of T20s, and look, India's team as well. We talked about it a bit last week. It's it's really India. By the end, it was certainly India A versus Australia A, I think.
But let's maybe look at that third game. Australia, India. So Australia chasing down 222, which would have been quite pleasing, I think, for Richie Benaud fans. But Maxwell 104 off 48 and finished it in fine style as well.
Yeah, I finally found some highlights. I mean, we said last week it's been really hard to get any coverage of that, and I see Sky Sport today has bumped up their prices here in New Zealand after losing all of these sports. But anyway, we won't dwell too much on that. But I finally did find some coverage, and gee, the highlights for that game were fantastic. I know, it was played a week, 10 days ago now, where people already know the result. But yeah, I think it's well worth having a look at. Ruturaj Gaikwad scored 120 off 50 balls, and it's been overshadowed by Maxwell. Maxwell actually went for 30 in the final over of India's innings, so he did owe them a few runs.
Maybe to give himself a chance of 100. He didn't want 70 not not out.
Yeah,
That's it.
But it was a quality piece of cricket to watch, and I mean, look, I think we might end up mentioning the first ODI of the West Indies in England series, but who needs World Cups, right? We go to these more bilateral series where we can have all these close games.
Yeah, look, absolutely. Shai giving West Indies a bit of hope. Fantastic 100. I don't know if you guys have seen that highlights of that game or any of that game, but it didn't look to me like a 300 plus wicket. There was a couple that literally shot along the ground, a couple of LBs. It didn't look easy to bat on at all, actually. Harry Brook looked quite good for 70 odd. England did what they've been doing for a little while, get off to a really, really good start, and then no one can really switch themselves on to get from 20 to 50. But yes, then Shai Hope comes in and I think Romario Shepherd actually set up the victory with 50 odd off 28 balls, I think, because it looks for all money. I needed
about 100 off 9 overs or something.
I left for work at exactly that point and thought, home and hosed. It wasn't on the radio or anything like that. So got to work, logged into Cricket Info and was like, what? How has that happened? But some clean hitting from Shai Hope.
My question is, are you concerned? I've got down here it's one game, but when you combine it with the last few games, the last sort of 10 weeks of English cricket, that Curran being expensive is not normal. That's out of character for him. But the only real shining light from there is that the spinners bowled really well in that particular set. But do you have any concerns there around the bowlers?
Yeah, I think it's gonna happen. There's a lot of talk about the fact that this is England's worst one-day international bowling performance. But individually, that is for Sam Curran, going for I think 98. I think the concerning factor for me is Ryan Ahmed went really, really well. Liam Livingstone went pretty well from a economy rate perspective. And they had Will Jacks in the side as well, who didn't even get a bowl when Bryden Carson and Sam Curran were going around the park a little bit. So I find that a little bit strange that they didn't try something different and just stuck with the five bowlers that they'd obviously earmarked at the start of the game from a matchups perspective. I don't know. I'm not massively concerned if I'm perfectly honest. England are going to be in a little bit of a rebuilding phase. Atkinson, Carse, Ahmed, weren't in and around that World Cup best 11. Obviously Atkinson was out there. So look, it doesn't really concern me massively, but I think we would want to see England put in a couple of results on the board in the remainder of the series. Interestingly, I was going through some old texts the other night, and one of my mates texted me before the Australia-South Africa semi-final in the World Cup and said, "Oh mate, I can't unpick this betting, what do you reckon?" And I gave him a pretty detailed response and put in there, I'd be back in Australia here. And then he did the same for the final, and I said, I've just got a sneaky feeling that Australia might do this. And then he's asked me again, and I've said, get some money on England to win this series after going 1-0 down is my next tip. So look, I don't put any of my own money on, but that's I think England will recover in North Sound tonight I think is the next game. So I think they'll come good. And
just sort of looking at the other side of the ledger there, the West Indies side, there were 3 or 4 names there which I did not recognise. I had to go and have a look at a few of their domestic numbers. Gudakesh Motti is the only one that I found had some really good numbers at first class level. So that's someone to look at there. But this performance is symptomatic of West Indies cricket, isn't it? They've played well to win this game. How do they back it up? Where's the consistency? So that's what I'm looking for the rest of the series.
Yeah, and look, Shai Hope especially, I think if people don't realise, his ODI numbers are fantastic. I think that was his 16th ODI 100. He averages over 50 in the format. And it's such a bizarre one because then you look at all his other formats, T20 and Test matches, very sort of middling averages. And even, because I thought, so like maybe something's going wrong there. I'll look at his like first class averages for that level, And it's the same. For some reason, four-day cricket and even T20 cricket and domestically, his averages are just no good. But 50 overs, get him in a 50-over game, and he's just a world beater. So, yeah, look, I think there's a lot to unpack about West Indies and kind of how their progress is it's going to be a long-term project, you would think, in terms of getting all of the players on the park. Has been the biggest challenge at the moment, hasn't it? I sort of wanted to go back to the England side in terms of something you said to me, Raj, last week, which actually wasn't around England. It was around the fact that Luke Ronchi was coaching over in Bangladesh and not Gary Stead. And you said to me that you thought that or even England's lack of success at the World Cup, something around sort of maybe a negative in terms of the sort of dual coach format. Have you, do either of you want to elaborate on that and how it's kind of working out for England? Because that was the big rage, right? For a while, everyone was going, okay, well, look, coaches don't want to do this because they're going to be away from home for so long. We've got to find some balance, and the way that teams are going to get around this are going to go with, white ball coaches and red ball coaches. And obviously England have done that. They've gone with this format, and it's, made a huge turnaround in their red ball cricket. But the white ball cricket, well, they did win a T20 World Cup. It's been a very short-term, slump, I guess, for the England white ball side. But I don't know, do we think there are any early returns on the dual coach method?
From an England perspective, I don't think it's made a massive amount of difference. Matthew Mott was very successful prior to taking the England job, particularly his white ball credentials. Trevor Bayliss, similarly, who obviously won as a World Cup. I think probably the difficulty really is in putting together what your priority is. And from an England perspective, Rob Key, who's I don't know his exact title, but managing director, for want of a better word, director of cricket, whatever you want to call it, he put his eggs in the Test match basket and really didn't give Joss Buttler and Matthew Mott the best sides leading into that, because they wanted to prioritise the rebuilding of Test cricket. And you'd say that from a Test cricket perspective, they've made a pretty good fist of that. And now it's just about, I think, finding that right level of balance. They've adapted the way that central contracts are given out. Really, really interesting to see the way that's actually happening. You've got 3 or 4 guys pulling out of the IPL to actually go and play some county cricket and put themselves in the shop window for that Test side. So look, I don't think that this split coaching thing is necessarily a right or wrong answer one way or the other. I think what it does depend on is the link between the two coaches. So I'd be really interested to see what the conversations are and who's brokering those conversations, and that they've got some consistency in terms of those plans. Really, really interesting to see that England have picked the likes of Zach Crawley, the likes of Ben Duckett, the likes of Harry Brook, the likes of Bryden Carson, Gus Atkinson, who I think will feature in that Test match shake-up. They're almost going to the kind of Australian model of, you pick your best 11 cricketers and get them out on the field and they'll do the job whatever the format is. So I think that might be something that we see is, particularly with the way that England are playing their Test cricket, why is a strike rate of 80 or 90 in Test cricket not going to translate pretty well into the white ball format?
Yeah, and I actually think that there's not enough of that particular thinking. Win the game that's in front of you. Don't worry about winning the 5-match series 3-2. Win every game. Win the game that is in front of you. I think that's missing a little bit from world cricket at the moment. And we really glossed over that Australia-India series. We should go back and talk about that. But that is symptomatic of it. With the split coaches thing, I think it's a mistake. Particularly for that linkage piece that you mentioned there. You look at sports around the world, NRL, NBA, NFL, you have specialist coaches and specialist roles. They all report up to someone who is overseeing the whole thing. Like even in the NRL, you have a first team head coach. He is at the meeting. He watches the games of the second, the third teams, the under-16s, and understands what they're doing and bringing them through the pathways. I don't think that happens at cricket, and it's probably harder to do because
you've
the
got
game
different
is so,
formats.
It's the same, and it takes such a long time, the game. But I definitely think that the structure needs to be, if we use New Zealand as an example, I don't want to pick on New Zealand. Gary Stead doesn't have to be at every series, right? We can have someone, ODI coach, we can have a T20 coach, we can have a first test coach, a long format coach, but all of them need to play under the same sort of schematic that is dictated by one coach. I think that's where England might be falling down a bit, because interestingly, the Bazball schematic would probably play pretty well in the one-day arena as well, and it's played well in the test arena so far. So I'm unsure why we can't adapt it throughout the whole program. And I think it should be looked at it like that. It is a whole program of, this is our international program. Let's not break it up into formats. Sure, there's specialist roles, specialist people who need to think about what they're doing in those spaces, but we have to have a unified plan at the top.
Interestingly, just hearing you guys talk about this makes me think of some Premier League football sides have a director of football. So it's not the manager. Sometimes the manager kind of is the person that goes that has the final say. In many ways, they often are. But yeah, maybe that is sort of the future. And I mean, Rob Key is probably that for England, isn't he? But where do all the communication lies? And I think that's probably something that might develop over the years. It's all sort of a learning process for these sides. But I think you're right in that, let's say they're not, the communication isn't great. We have absolutely no idea. But let's say Matthew Mott and Brendan McCullum aren't talking about every single player. I'm sure they probably are to certain degrees.
I think they are, and I think that the difficulty in comparing it to soccer or rugby or any other sport is, your Man United, Chelsea, whoever it is, they play a system. If they're playing 4-4-2, their reserve team is playing 4-4-2. Their under-19 side is playing 4-4-2. Their under-13s, their under-11s are playing the same way to the same game plan. You can't do that with T20, one-day internationals and test matches. You can have some similarities and some mindsets, but I don't think it's necessarily as simple as having someone with one unified way of playing. But I think it is around the communication between that. And the reality as well is that even if we look at the amount of soccer that's played, football for our English listeners, you do get a little bit of a break. Cricket is now, there isn't a break. Non-stop. It is a 12-month all round the world sport. There isn't that opportunity to breathe and plan. And that's probably one of the big things is when you've got split coaches, at least one of them can be planning for the next series. Whereas if you've only got one coach, you're playing a test match and then trying to plan for, think about it like this. You've got split coaches in this. You're literally on the field in a World Cup final on the whatever it was, 25th of November, and 3 days later you're then playing a T20. And in New Zealand's case, 5 days later you're playing a test match.
Different country and completely different conditions. Good. That's probably a good way to bring it back to India because Rahul Dravid, right?
Let's get back to India. Rahul Dravid, renewed as coach, I think has had to have his arm twisted by the sounds of the reports coming out of India. What do we want to talk about in respect of Rahul Dravid? And also, Raj, you touched about the fact we have glossed over a pretty decent cricket series. We are at 42 minutes already, though.
On the Dravid thing, you said his arm's been twisted, so kind of maybe fill me in a little bit more, because when I look at his performance, I certainly think he warrants an extension. I mean, I actually think maybe before this performance at the World Cup and even some parts of it afterwards, I feel like I often see criticism of Rahul Dravid. He's someone that seems to cop it a little bit from the Indian fans. But I mean, I guess they're holding very high standards, right? Because when I look at them, one of the best tests, they're in the World Test Championship final, obviously didn't win that, in the ODI World Cup final, and one of the best performances I've seen from a side across a World Cup. Obviously they didn't win it, but they're sort of almost comparisons when I think about across sport of the Patriots. Did the Patriots go unbeaten in football, and Golden State Warriors went 73-9, broke a record, and then didn't win the final thing? But those sides are still remembered as great sides, and India, I think this World Cup, I'm sure in 3-4 cycles of this World Cup, I'll still think, India was amazing in that World Cup. Rahul Dravid's been at the helm of through all of that. Obviously, a huge amount of cricket, but did he not want to stick around? What's the deal? Why do we know why he? Because reports are that it's a very short extension potentially to the end of the T20 World Cup.
Yeah, to the end of 2024, the 2020 World Cup in 2024. Look, I haven't read the reports about him having his arm twisted and all that, but I could imagine that being the coach of the Indian cricket team would be one of the most exhausting jobs in the world. You can win games and go, oh, but why didn't you win it in this manner? Even though you won the game. So I can imagine that. He did mention in a couple of the articles I read that he thanked his family for giving him the time and space to do his job and to do it well. He talked a lot about building culture in the Indian dressing room, which I think is something that's important around winning teams, and all winning teams do well. But I think traveling 200 plus days a year has got to take its toll.
Yeah, I think it comes back again. We talk a lot about this with players and captains, I think, and also India's strength in depth from a playing perspective. They've also got some strength in depth from a coaching perspective as well. I wonder whether they might start to question the number of overseas coaches in the IPL, potentially, particularly from a BCCI perspective. But yeah, the reports are that they offered the T20 job to Ashish Nehra, who obviously had some success and has had some success with Gujarat Titans. Vivesh Lakshman is with the side at the moment, I think, from a coaching perspective. So they've got some people that have got some experience to potentially take over. I think if I look at it as a neutral, through his tenure as coach, India have been in finals of the World Test Championship, of obviously the 50-over format. I disagree that they were the best team in the World Cup, because they weren't, because Australia were. So look at the trophy and the engraving; it tells you a lot about who the best team.
An English person would obviously say that, but anyway, carry on.
What? If you get your name engraved on the trophy, you've won it. Yeah,
even if you tie it.
Yeah, it's even if there's an asterisk. Anyway, let's not go into that. So look, I think the bar is set really, really high, and the expectation of someone in Indian cricket is probably going to be higher than anywhere else in the world. But I think that that continuity that they're going to get now, knowing that he's with the side, he's pretty understated as well. So I think he's the guy that's probably not going to be too het up with some of that political stuff. You can see certainly some former players that now don the coach's hat, they would have just thrown the toys out of the pram if they even found out that there was a potential approach for someone else, and then it's like, well, can you carry on? I think he's going to be as steady a pair of hands as he was batting at number 3 for India. And look, the reality is that they're a gnat's whisker away from holding at least 2 of the big showpiece trophies. So I think he's the right man to take them forward. I think it'd be pretty harsh, based on a record of 10-1, to get the push. What about this series? Anything we want to touch on quickly before we move on and probably talk some?
Because you want to talk about Mitchell Johnson, don't you?
The one point I just wanted to make around performance in that series and potentially for the World Cup coming up is Matthew Wade. I thought his performance over the whole series where he played, I think he played every game. He didn't bat in one of the games, but he got 42 not out, 28 not out, 36 not out, and 22 closing out the innings. He was cool, calm in a number of situations there at the end of games, especially chasing 4 of those, or those 4 innings that he batted were second innings, they were chasers. So I think that he's given them great options down the order with the likes of Tim David and all those other closers that they've got. They've got him as well, who can engineer a chase, Michael Bevan style, towards the end of it. So just wanted to highlight his performance.
Fair, because he's someone that I kind of dismiss. I feel like I dismissed him before the T20 World Cup that they won, that he was obviously a big part of. So he was excellent in that series. Did you want to talk about Mitchell Johnson? I actually, from my own point of view, this has been I mean, New Zealander watching, a bit of drama in Australia. I've just been smiling the whole time. It's been entertaining. I will say, obviously, he's now copped a lot of the pushback in terms of what he's actually said. There's, I think, reports that he's now sort of lost a commentary gig because of it. That was just something I came across. I don't know how accurate that is, but I think that a lot of the points that he was making are kind of fair, aren't they? Like, all sort of, maybe he's gone a bit strong on some of them.
The message was probably accurate. The way it came across quite personal and aggressive.
Yes.
But, essentially what he was saying is accurate. David Warner's averaging 28 over the last however long he's struggled in red ball cricket. Probably up until the last Pakistan series, or did he score some runs against South Africa?
Scored 100 against South Africa, but it had been...
But that was an anomaly, I think. But look, he does he deserve
a hero send-off is the quote, isn't it?
That's a question I don't know how to answer that one.
Yeah, and look, I think some of the points in that article are probably accurate. I think harping back to the ball tampering, and look, I can't believe I'm going to say this. Whatever you think about it, and I've got plenty to say on it, they have served their time and their punishment. David Warner is still not able to take a leadership role, even with a big bash side, I believe. So, he's got that ban in place. He took 12 months out of cricket, obviously with that ban. I personally didn't like the way that he came out and sort of signalled his intent, probably 2 years out from that from that Test series. I don't think there's too many players that get afforded the ability to kind of pick that. You only need to look back in relatively recent history. Ian Healy didn't get a farewell in Brisbane. They brought Gilchrist in. Stuart Broad, decided he was only going to make that decision during his final.
I'm not so sure about that because he had his book deal out pretty quick, but anyway, you carry on. But I get your point. In
the media.
In the media, he'd certainly not sent out the invitations for his farewell at the end of the Ashes. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally.
But I think it was more the tone of what he's gone into, criticism of George Bailey, and realistically, from an Australia perspective, there's no one really pulling up trees in Sheffield Shield cricket. You've got the likes of Pekowski, I think has now been ruled out for a little period of time. Bancroft, he was standing next to David Warner at the Bunnings checkout as they were purchasing the sandpaper. So
I thought you weren't going to say anything about it.
That's a fact.
Harris and Renshaw are the other
and
two.
then Harris and Renshaw. Harris has been on every tour for the last 5 years and hasn't really taken his opportunity. And Renshaw, I don't even know that Renshaw is a bona fide opener. He bats in the middle order at times. They've not kind of gone right. He's going to open the batting, and that's the role that he's going to play. So I think it's a little bit sort of vitriolic and personal. By all reports, he's lost a commentary gig already. But he sold a few copies of the Western Australian
column. But in real talk, though, David Warner, for the majority of his career, would have walked into any team in any format as their opener. I think for the majority of his career, and there's not many people you can talk about like that.
And it comes back to the conversation we were having earlier on. He just had a fantastic World Cup, and it's not like he's been able to go home and play 3 rounds of Sheffield Shield to prove his form. His form is he's just averaged 50 at the World Cup and a couple of hundred. So. Yeah, he should be in the side.
As much as we like to poke fun at him at times on this podcast, he has been a fantastic cricketer for Australia. His Test record, suggests that the last couple of years, obviously it hasn't gone as well. But I mean, harking back, you look at guys like Ricky Ponting, Sachin Tendulkar. Their last couple of years probably were not up to the high standards of their career as well. The farewell is all a bit funny, but I think he's probably going to deserve it when you look back at the full fullness of his career.
Oh, look, he may well. I'll certainly be switching off the TV when it starts. Though.
When he starts jumping, fist pumping.
Wow, yeah, I won't be watching at that point. That's for sure. The minute anyone tries to lift him, or a convertible comes out onto the ground, or any sign of a ticker tape parade, and I'll be turning over and watching Love Island.
Good choice.
Is there anything else we want to talk about, Lippy? You've probably got 3 or 4 pages of New Zealand stuff to rattle through.
Well, I was going to talk about the White Ferns a little bit, but it hasn't really been. I don't know that I want to be honest. I think it's just dark times really for that side, and I think they've been trying to, there was some hope for things to improve, I guess, when Ben Sawyer came in, and I don't know whether you look at the coaching ranks and all that kind of stuff, and you look at someone like Ben Sawyer he goes off and does franchise tournaments, I don't know what the setup is in terms of his communication with the White Ferns players all the time and all that kind of stuff, so whether he's fully committed to that role, I don't know, but yeah, it just sort of hasn't gone well in the development, and you even look at some of the the players that we really rely on in general time in the last couple of years, the big name players, they haven't stepped up in these 2 ODI or 2 T20s either. So yeah, it's been pretty tough, and you sort of think when they lost the first T20 to Pakistan, you were thinking, okay, a bit of a blip, they'll bounce back and win these next 2. They obviously lost the second in a game played at University Oval, which they'd renamed, the Susie Bates Oval for a big special occasion, and still, results in a loss. So yeah, I think some serious soul searching for that side and for New Zealand cricket in terms of what we're going to do with that White Ferns side and how to kind of rebuild it, because some of these players that we've relied on for a long time are starting to phase out of the side, and who's coming through is the big questions.
Any domestic news you want to mention? Finn Allen,
that was pretty awesome. If anyone hasn't gone back and seen him, he scored 168 off 110 balls for Auckland about a week ago now. But yeah, look, I think really the key thing he just needs to have a big season, Finn. I think it would have been really disappointing for him to miss that World Cup. I mean, he was positioned to be at that World Cup for the 18 months prior. He was given every opportunity to be there. I think, if you asked the coaching staff, they wanted him to be there. They put him in positions to succeed and hoped that he would take those opportunities, and it just didn't happen. And now I think he needs a big summer for us, domestically, to then hopefully, be back in that side for the T20 World Cup.
And that's where I guess we mentioned having a unified plan at the top. He is one player that I think could have a future across all 3 formats in New Zealand cricket. But he needs to know what they're looking for from him. It's a good step for Hunter. What was the actual score?
He scored 168 off 110 balls for Auckland in a big chase. So chased down a big score, and him and Robbie O'Donnell put a big partnership together, and Robbie was actually going at about a 50% strike rate for a while there. But I mean, yeah, it's interesting you say that about Finn in terms of across all formats, because he's back in Auckland, he's back in the 4-day side for Auckland, but has very much not set the world on fire in 4-day cricket, and now is batting like 6 or 7 for Auckland. So yeah, there's getting a defined role, I think, is going to be pretty important for him. But I suppose from his point of view, what's his motivation for playing 4-day cricket when he can go all around the world and make all this money in T20 cricket?
We've seen this story play out before. If you look at Martin Guptill's cricketing career, I liken it very similar to that. I don't think that he didn't reach his potential across in red ball cricket. He could have been an incredible number 5 batsman for New Zealand for a long time. That's not where they saw him, and his plan wasn't accurate. Finn Allen needs to be handled with care around how he mentally applies himself across the formats he's playing. And I hope someone's in his ear about that.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we'll continue to talk about him throughout the course of this New Zealand domestic summer, and hopefully gets an opportunity in the Black Cap as well at some point. That probably is all from us here on the Top Order podcast this evening. What do we know about spin selections? Bangladesh currently 143 for 7.
Who's taken the wickets?
The 3 spinners have got 2 apiece.
And the handled ball off the pacer. I know it doesn't count. But.
And then we've got the handle ball. So we'll wrap that test match match up next week on the Top Order podcast, as well as plenty more cricket
Into
coming
Australia,
up.
Pakistan, just about next week.
Yeah, Australia, Pakistan. We've got India women playing England women. We've got the culmination of this England West Indies series as well. So lots and lots more cricket coming up. We will be back in your podcast and vodcast feeds this time next week. But for now, it is good night and God bless from us here in Auckland. We'll see you soon. Good night.